Welcome. This is another Khan Academy support video. Specifically, we're going to be looking at the third assignment called Intercepts from a Graph. Before we get started looking at those problems, I want to go over a couple key concepts that will help us as we start moving into these intercept-based problems. I'm going to make my whiteboard much larger here. We're going to be talking about two key terms, a y-intercept and an x-intercept. As you should recall, now that we've started to look at equations with two variables, an x and a y, there are lots of possible solutions to those equations. A y-intercept and an x-intercept refer to two very specific solutions to every linear equation. A y-intercept asks, if you set the x value equal to 0, what will the y value have to be? It's the value for y when x is equal to 0. The x-intercept asks, what will the x value be if we set y equal to 0? In other words, it's the value for x if y is equal to 0. And the other thing we need to understand is that because these linear equations, these xy equations, have lots of possible pairs of solutions, we use graphs as a way to visually show all those solutions at once. So I'm going to lose the whiteboard here and talk about the graph that they provided us with. Here we see this graph, this grid in black. The up and down part of the grid is what we refer to as the y-axis. It shows us our y value at any point in time. And the side-to-side grid is called the x-axis. So however far left or right I am on the graph tells me my x value. However far up or down I am on the graph tells me my y value. And this blue line has an infinite number of points, tons of points on it, and every single point represents one of the pairs that could be a solution to the equation that was graphed. They ask us here to find the x-intercept and the y-intercept. Well, the x-intercept, if you recall, is going to be the value for x when y is set equal to 0. In other words, we look on our graph to figure out what does the x value have to be when y is equal to 0, and that'll be the x-intercept. This blue line, to find an x-intercept, where does the blue line cross with the x-axis? It crosses right here at the negative 250. So what that point on the x-axis where it meets the blue line is telling me, this is saying, hey, if x is equal to negative 250, the y value will be equal to 0. The y-intercept refers to the other point that's located on one of the axes. It asks, where does our blue line right here cross with the y-axis? And the coordinates for the point where this cross or this intersection happens is 0 for x and 100 for y. That's this point located right here. So what we're going to start to see with these x-intercepts and y-intercepts, the x-intercept is always going to have an x value wherever it crosses the x-axis, and its y value will be set at 0. The y-intercept will be the opposite. You find wherever the blue line hits the y-axis, and that value is your y value, and because you're located right on the y-axis, you didn't move left or right at all, your x value will be 0. We're going to look at a couple more examples here. So I'll zoom in on this graph. It says determine the intercepts of the line. This time, to mess with me a bit, they first listed the y-intercept. So they're asking where is the solution when this blue line hits the y-axis. So I track this blue line, I see the y-axis, and it crosses right here. Directly between 6 and 8, or 0.6 and 0.8, would be 0.7. Now we're below the axis, so that's going to be negatives. So I'm going to put negative 0.7 for the y value, and the x value for every y-intercept is 0. So again, they asked me to find the y-intercept. I figure out where does that blue line cross the y-axis. And because it crossed right here with a y value of negative 0.7, that's our y value, and the x value is 0. For the x-intercept, they're asking where does this blue line cross with the x-axis. So we see this blue line crossing the x-axis right here. So we need to describe these coordinates. I see it lines up right with the negative 1.2. That's negative 1.2 to the left, so that's our x value. Our y value, we did not move up or down from the origin at all, so our y value for every x-intercept is always going to be 0. We'll look at a couple more. Here they ask us to determine the intercepts of the line, and once again we see on our graph it crosses right here on the y-axis. So this point where my mouse is at right now represents our y-intercept. We see that's right between 250 and 300. Right in the middle of 250 and 300 is going to be 275. Again, if this is the y-intercept, that's our y value of 275. And we're still in the middle of the graph, so the x value is 0. For the x-intercept, we need to figure out where does this blue line cross with the x-axis, and we see this point right here is where the blue line crosses the x-axis. It's right in the middle of 100 and 150. Right in the middle of 100 and 150 would be 125. So at this point, our x value is 125, and we did not move up or down at all, so the y value is 0. I hope that was helpful. If you've got questions, I would encourage you to always use the Get Help function on Khan Academy or watch Sal Khan's videos, and you can always feel free to send me an email, and I'm happy to jump on Google Meet and work with you there. Keep up the great work.